that maybe they should put lines around things, because the drawing on the left looks like a watercolor or a faded out photo. It's not what we do. We're still architects, we draw lines, and we're not watercolorists. We don't depend on light to define an edge. The minute they did that, I suddenly got interested. Now the realistic views were starting to look better graphically. The other thing they did, and there's a slide here that will show that, so I'll wait until, but realistic views have another really cool trait. You can start cheating, and I'll show you how I did this. But also, when you now do realistic views, all of your RPC content starts to show up. So you no longer just have to render. If you want to show trees and people and cars and artwork, your decals, all that stuff, you can now do a realistic view. And all that content is now visible. Does anybody here do night rendering? Your night renderings, all of your light fixtures will now appear in a realistic view. You no longer have to go through the pains of render to start seeing certain things. Revit is blurring the line between full-blown rendering and line drawing. And that's becoming more and more of a blurred line, no pun intended. How many people know that you can stick stuff behind stuff in Revit? Elevations, sections, 3D views, any of your views. You can slide stuff behind it out of the box. You used to be able to do more. But for instance, just to show you, okay. So on this view, I have no background. It's just a nice flat drawing, which has its place. It really does. I'm fine with that. But most of the time, I like to come in and under background, I like to give it at least a gradient at first. Now this is what comes out of the box. Stock Revit. Those little colors that whatever aquamarine, light blue, and white fade works on, I dare say, 100% of anything you'll ever do in Revit. It's the most non-offensive colors I've ever seen. Goes with everything for some reason. Nice choice in colors. But just because Revit gave it to you, play with it. So let's say, for instance, I want to be a little bolder and I want to come in here and let's just go darker. And then you go, well, that looks nice, but why don't we just flip it? So we'll take that dark color and we'll make it white. And then we'll do the bottom color in a nice dark color. See how it changes the whole feel of that drawing? Sometimes, and the rule of thumb is, this is what you want to use as your rule of thumb. There it is. If your building has a light or a white or a bright top, you want to try to put the dark sky behind it. So you flip it. If your building has a really dark top, then you want to put the light sky behind it. That way it just pops. You try to put the brightest thing in front of the darkest thing, and that makes your drawing lift off the paper. So that's kind of your first guideline on whether you should put the top dark or light. But then the other thing is, sometimes it's fun just to play. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in a really silly mood, and I'll just sit there and start playing with colors just to see, A, how obnoxious I can be, but at the same time, every once in a while, graphics is graphics. There's times where you don't want to even try to look real. You want it to be odd. Does anybody here do presentations for competitions? I have judged more competitions than I'll admit to. And I can tell you now, I don't remember 99% of anything I saw during a competition entry, because I'm looking at 200 to 500 entries. I can tell you why the ones that won, in my mind, won. I remember. That alone was huge. After you've seen 200 or 300 designs, just the fact that one or two of them stuck in my mind, that's why a good song is a good song. It had a hook. It had pop. Your mind remembered it and gave you something to hum. So a lot of the times, just coming in and doing something so gregarious, it adds a certain panache to your project that people just go, what about that one that had that really ugly sky? And they go, yeah, they'll remember. So a lot of the times, it's not whether it's good or bad, it's just they remember you. Now, not that I would ever do anything like that. Nobody forgets me after 30 years. They remember. I have a neat business card. They may not remember my name, but they certainly remember on our. They just go, I don't know what. So sometimes something to be said for being bold like this. And then this just shows you the 4 out-of-the-box skies. There's a sky, no background, a photo. Does everybody know you can put photographs behind all these views? Has everybody done it before? Does anybody want to see how to do it? We'll move on. Because I got another technique. Playing with shadows. Folks, this is huge. This is what sold me on Revit. This is part of the big $1 million ticket for me. Those are the same drawings. Same building, same views. All I did was play with the sun and see when the building looked its best. But that was the one I printed. It took me 2 minutes just to go through the times of the day and the time of year, and then once I figured that out, once I got it to where, it actually demonstrated that these were fins and they were actually behind each other by layering them, and I liked the way the trees looked, I can't tell you how much sun affects what we do. So take the time to play with sun. Does anybody use design options? Does anybody use design options in their final working drawings to show additive alternates? Yeah. It's a great way to keep in one set of drawing multiple designs. This is an example of actually an entire floor plan is a design option. Because not only do you play with just a single roof or a single element, you can actually come in and do an entire floor plan as a design option. I mean, this was all part of the monster project, but this one cubicle area with the other copy and support, I didn't quite know which one they wanted. So I just said, well, I wasn't going to certainly stop working on it until they decided, so I just decided to use a design option, and then they liked both of them. And they said, is one more expensive? And I said, yeah, so yeah. So we bid it out. We bid it with 2 packages, just by creating a separate set of views for each option, and it just kept tracking the job. And design options are wonderful. They mess with your head. Does everybody agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah. And they really mess with it. This just talks about creating views. We all have demolition views. We have new construction views. We have existing views. I do a ton of remodeling. So for me, I like designing on top of my demolition plan so that I know which walls are new, which ones are existing, where my outlets are currently versus where I'm moving them to, so I don't hire an engineer. So I tend to do a lot of visibility overrides with phasing so that I can control and show multiple views by just controlling the visibility of the phasing. So anything that's demolished is really dark, anything that's existing is really light, new is super dark. That's how I keep visually in track of it, but it also helps contractors because they don't have to keep flipping between the demolition plan, the existing floor plan, and the new floor plan. I can just give them this really quickly electronically, and they just go, oh God, it's great, it's all in one drawing. We used to do it with a light table, and that's how we did it. That's how we kept it all straight. So I just learned that Revit can do this, and I just took advantage of it. This is just talking about the right tool for the right meeting. Don't go into a preliminary meeting when you're talking about building form and scale and overall design with a finished rendering, because they'll inevitably start talking about brick. And you just want to talk about roof forms, and geometry, and mass, and siding. Go in with just a black and white view, throw in a couple of material overrides so that it looks a little bit prettier and gets your idea across. And then as your design becomes real in your client's eyes, start adding materials, colors, and then only when your design is really done and your client has really made a lot of these decisions, give them a rendering. And boy, it locks in that design. I mean, they see everything that they worked on, and they become very personally attached to it. There's nothing better than a contractor saying, God, I could probably save you almost $20,000 by getting rid of that wrought iron work in front. We can just, leave it open or do chain link. And the client's going, God, no, I spent an hour with the architect designing that. I'm just sitting back going, So, this just talks, remember the little technique we did with the glass block wall? I just did a grid pattern and changed it to blue and make it transparent. I was designing a remodel of a Jack-in-the-Box, and I knew I was gonna have this screen wall that kind of went around the building, but I really didn't know what it was yet. So that's when I kind of discovered that grid effect. So when I first started playing with the design, it was nothing more than just lines colored in a brown, set to a transparency. And the client said, "What is that?" I said, "I don't know. It's some sort of metal screening, something you can see through, perforated metal maybe, you know, welded wire fabric maybe, not sure." Because when you see the renderings of it, you'll understand why. But then as the design got a little more accepted, I actually went into a realistic view and set up the materials of perforated metal. And now when I take the exact same view and set it to realistic, suddenly that material starts to become a little more real. But it didn't take any work, which is really nice, because I'm actually kind of busy and it's nice just to do stuff like this kind of thing. And then the other thing is, do what the car guys do. Make your building look good, whatever it takes. If it means forcing the perspective and photographing from a view no one will ever see it, but it really makes your drawing look good. I mean, how many people have seen car ads? You see a car from a view, you will only see if he's running over. I mean, not a great view to look at a car, but boy, when you're selling it, that was the best view. So to me, this is a terrible view of the building. It doesn't say anything about what it's really doing. But when you combine it with that view, they suddenly go, "Oh, I see the design. Oh, that's what it looked like when I walked up to it." It puts themselves in the view, and you can start humanizing your views. So you're no longer just standing off in a distance and looking at this little gem. You're personally bringing that in. So I'm a huge believer of change the view. Does everybody know how to do that really quickly without sillily spinning your model in 3D? Has anybody spun a perspective? Has anybody regretted spinning a perspective? The easier way is take, God, I love that sound. Can we get rid of it now? Are y'all sick of it? Okay. So the easiest way to do that is just to go into the view's property and leave the eye, the actual target elevation same, and then just give this a higher number. And what happens is you start just to change, because you already liked your perspective. You pretty much got the building where you thought it looked the best it looked. Start playing with it. Now, obviously, now I'm gonna have to get in here and tweak my crop edges. So I gotta come in here and tell it to expose my little edges, and I can grab that grip and I can bring it down a bit, you know, so I can show some context. But at least that starts to now create a totally different feel from the first one. Now I happen to like both, but that one shows the geometry a little better to build. So there's pluses and minuses. There's no right or wrong here. Yes?
Can you show without changing the crop region, how you can change the camera view depth, increase, decrease it?
How I just did this?
Show the actual changing the view camera focal depth by zooming in and out. So on your little wheel, pull the wheel across, right click, there's a focal depth.
Oh, there is. I don't mess with it, but yes, you can, just like a real camera.
Yeah.
You can actually change that. You can change it from a 28 millimeter to an 18 to a 35. If you go to that level, true photographers, they will go to that trouble because you will not warp your perspective. I tend to like warping it a little bit because I like to force perspectives. But your way is the absolute correct way to do it. Change the camera. So we'll go back to what we had. I don't want to completely undermine everything, okay? This just talks about putting yourself inside of a perspective view. Always pull the drawing around you so that you step into the drawing, whether it's an interior or an exterior. This is one of my favorite little techniques, and we're going to have time to do this. Believe it or not, there's no Photoshop here. This is 100% Revit. Does anybody ever remember doing presentation boards where you would draw like a sky that went across the entire 3 or 4 boards, and that's what tied it together? Or you'd have a ground plane? Or have you ever wanted to be able to take your 3 floor plans of a 3-story house maybe and put it on the actual site, aerial photo? That'd be kind of cool. This is so easy. They said Revit couldn't do it. What you do is, you come in here and you take an elevation and duplicate it. And then once you have that, go ahead and zoom out for a ways and turn on your sky background. And we're going to view it. We'll come in and do a pretty one because we want to be bold. So now I have a sky background. And go ahead and set it to where there's no crop anymore. But show me that crop region again, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat Revit, and I'm going to create an elevation. I'm going to go ahead and crop it again. Zoom all. What I have here is nothing more than an elevation view. I just cheated Revit into not knowing that I'm not looking at the model elements. You can't create an elevation without model elements. You've got to have a model in there somewhere. But what I wanted was that gradient fill. You can also use as a background photograph. So if you want to take a photograph of your site, your background, your aerial photo, and this with floor plans, it all works. But once you have this view, what I learned Revit will do, and I had no clue it did it except when I learned this by accident. Revit creates an alpha channel. Does everybody know what an alpha channel is? An alpha channel is a way of basically hiding the sky on an element, because has anybody ever placed an elevation view on like a drafting fill or something like that? You get a white box around your elevation. Watch what happens here. If I drag an elevation on top of this, oh, I gotta deactivate the view. I'll just do two. See what's happening though? Revit is automatically creating an alpha channel and it's screening the white background border of every drawing. So when you place a view on top of a view on top of a view, it's actually alpha channeling the sky in the background. So one of the things you can now do is whatever that background is, it can be anything you want. This is where it's purely art. And if you want to get more creative with this, just start grabbing a masking region, and you can do anything you want with a masking region. You can do splines, you can do angles, it doesn't matter. But just in the interest of time, I'll come in here and create just a nice simple little triangle. And then if I want to maybe place these a little more artistically, I can start playing with that. This is a limitless possibility for art. What you choose to do on your board is completely different than what you do with your images. But just know that you can overlay all this, and everyone will think this is Photoshop. Even the Revit developers thought this was Photoshop, because they knew you couldn't put an elevation on top of a fill region, because that's what everybody assumes you're doing. Does anybody think they'll use this technique?
You do.
It is fun. I mean, I use it a lot for all kinds of things. That just gives you an idea of a couple of options that I've done just in the past, just playing, with these ideas for brochures and competitions and presentation boards. But it's literally limitless, and it works really well with photographs. This is another version of that. Take 3 views that are all identical. What this was I was trying to explain that there's a jack-in-the-box underneath this, and I couldn't mess with the roof, so all I was doing was like what we did in college, a little balsa wood model. I was just dropping it right on top. And the minute my brain said that, I'm dropping it right on top, I went, God, too bad I can't do an animation. And then I went, oh, but I can do like a series of these and do transparencies and give you an idea of motion. You can start doing this technique with all kinds of things, tracking a building's phase from an existing to a new phase by showing what you did to it. Just by lining up multiple views of the same view, changing its transparency, changing the halftone values. But because you're putting views on top of views, it automatically alphas all the background garbage. And it allows you to do this. So I kind of thought that was a really cool trick. This just talks about using AutoCAD inside of Revit. I'm the world's worst ever. I use AutoCAD a ton inside of Revit. I don't even know AutoCAD. So, but I do use my engineer's drawings. I'm not going to recreate what other manufacturers give me. So I use a lot of Revit. Works very well with CAD. So just bring it in. Creating multiple views next to each other, but only noting it once. Is everybody lazy here? I had to cut a floor plan to show this glass hand railing with this planter above it. Normally that's two completely separate little floor plans. I was lazy, I just did two floor plans, put them right next to each other, got rid of the view title on one of them, activated one of them, grabbed all my levels across both of them, grabbed dimensions across both of them, did notes on one and just dragged them over to the other side of the drawing. It's actually two floor plans, but only one of them's active. But creatively use your paper. You can. This is one of those other things Revit's really good at doing. Trees. Is everybody happy with the way trees look in non-rendered views? Show of hands. Who likes them? Those little paper cutouts. We all love them. This is the way Revit looks out of the box. Ta-da. Love to go show that to a client. Said nobody ever. That's the way mine look. And yet, I can still render the heck out of these. And believe it or not, I can even mix the old and the new. That's actually an RPC placeholder of a palm tree. And that's actually a VWG tree that a friend of mine and I built. And the way you do this is actually a really simple little thing. Here we have a view that's basically little VWG blocks that create little palm trees that look really nice. And if I change this view to coarse, suddenly they all change to RPC. They'll render this way. And in some cases they look pretty. I like some of the RPC placeholder trees. I mean, for that, palm trees actually look pretty good. The reality is there's two trees for every one tree I use. If I set the view to medium, you can see both of them, and that's how I can pick and choose what I want to see. All I got to do is just right click on something and just say hide this one element, and now that one tree is gone. The reason I do this though is so that I can literally sit there and have a view that looks like this with all these kinds of nice looking trees for non-rendered views, but then at the same time I've placed those trees for a very good reason. I want to be able to render the scene. You can't render them unless they're RPC plant material. So that's my workaround for how I do trees. I did the same thing with people. Only now I've used my visibility of coarse, medium, and fine. So I kind of had to come up with a new way to control people. So what I did is, for everyone, does everybody know who Dwayne is? Ron, Yin Yin. They're our friends. I mean, I've gotten very close with all of them. It's been almost 16 years using these people. We're very tight. But I don't like the way they look in non-rendered views. Those little paper cutouts. Ready for this one? This is fun. And those people that take my labs, they usually get one of these because I get Dwayne. That's Dwayne. That's, believe it or not, that's Dwayne. You just don't see it yet. If I highlight him, and I go to his properties, if I turn on the RPC and I turn off what I did, there he is. Dwayne in all his glory. If you hit the space bar, he'll dance for you. He casts shadows. He looks just beautiful. But the joy of this is if I set this view to a realistic view, Dwayne suddenly develops a little personality. Not quite so dull. But we don't always want this in our drawings. We don't want photorealism. So what I've learned to do is, even in a realistic view, I can override this by getting rid of that, and I can actually show people the way I like to show people. Diagrammatically give the drawing sense of scale. Hang on one second, because I'm running out of time. The other thing that's really fun about this is if you go back to any view, whether shaded or hidden line, I can also get rid of the line work. Because one of the things that I've learned is a lot of the times when we had a sea of people in a rendering or in a view, I actually would draw them lighter and lighter as they went further and further, just like I did trees. Believe it or not, this is a Revit mass right there. Because it's a Revit mass, I can right click on it. I can override its views by element. I can give that person a color. I can make all my people ethnically correct. If I'm in Arizona, give them a solid color. I can sit there, and if I want to make them a half tone, I can come in and right click on them. And I can make all of my people half tone, but get that same color. And then if I decide, I kind of like seeing his face and seeing it, a little more realistic, I'll just come back in and add the CAD detail. So that's how I control people. And to me, it's all about, once you model something, that's half the job. The rest of it is now how do you get it to look the way you want it to look. And how many of us have ever been with people that look at what we're doing and they just go, oh, that's all well and good, it all looks like SketchUp, but you can't keep working on it. Right? They don't realize the drawing's done, it's there. They're just not seeing it because you're choosing not to let them see it. So a lot of this has to do with just how you let people see your design. But that shows you, that's actually the Revit mass I designed by tracing the little DWG person. That's actually a chart pack person. Does anybody know who chart pack is? They were the rubber stamps and the rub-on people that we used to use when none of us could draw. And then just to show you, normally this class also includes a little bit on rendering. I'm a huge believer of rendering. I love rendering. But how many people like it? Rendering is one of those things. It's a true art form. You gotta love it. It's like pulling teeth to some people. To me, it's candy because it's what I do for a living. But I've learned we're architects. We're not renderers. We're not movie set designers. We don't have to make it perfect. But I guarantee you, my clients have all been blown away by any rendering I've done because it's more than they've ever seen. So I look at anything I can do in Revit, and I'm still impressed with this. But that shows you what 20 minutes does to a rendering. That's 20 minutes of Sunday, and look at every material completely changed. My glass transparency changed. I can't see the lights inside the building anymore with this one. I kind of like that one, but you don't know until you render. So rendering is purely an art form. You never know what you're going to get. But once you've gone to the trouble of doing a rendering, please, by all means, do 3 more. Just change the time of day, add some lights to it, and voila. For every one rendering you just spent hours and hours setting up, you get 3 or 4 out of the deal. And literally, if you're on a decent machine, just start your rendering, minimize it, go to your desktop, reopen Revit from scratch, go open the same project, start a new rendering, set the time of day, minimize it, go back and open Revit again. Revit takes advantage of multiple cores when it renders. It's the only time. So you can have 3 or 4 renderings cooking and then go back and work on the project. Because you're going to throw them away anyway, they're just rendering for you, so you don't care. So, but this goes to show you also, this was that one with the perforated metal screens, and that was the way it ended up being rendered. But I love night rendering, so for me those really sell. Putting real photographs behind renderings makes a big difference. Just have a nice sky behind it. Those are non-rendered trees, by the way. Those are my CAD trees. I actually figured out with a friend of mine how to do this. That took a little work. And then this talks about sliding real-world photographs underneath your rendering. If you export any rendering to a TIFF or a PNG, it automatically alpha channels your sky, and it gives you a rendering without any background. You can then slide in a drafting view any photograph, any image of the real world lined up with where you put your camera, and then slide your rendering right on top of it, and you actually will see exactly where this is in real life. If you're doing remodeling inside an urban environment, man, it's nice. I just happen to be lucky enough to have a mountain view. That shows you those sliding in under. That's out in alpha channel rendering. And then there's the sky, and you just register it. And then render your elevations. make really great presentations. They render really quickly too. I mean, we're talking 15 seconds to render an elevation, and then render your floor plan. Set a few materials, and you're done. That's a negative presentation, and then that's my very first Revit presentation in 2002. So it does show you practice makes not perfect, but better than you did in 2002. Now, you had a question, sir, sorry.
The 2D component or the component, the CAD component on the people, is that a 2D?
It is. You have to rotate it and orient it to the camera.
Okay, so if you go into your 3D view in there and rotate, what happens?
He gets very flat.
Okay.
He disappears. As I said, they have no personality, no depth. But for what I use them for, they're wonderful like that. Because, you know, they're for presentations.
Right. No, it looks great.
Thank you. Any other questions before we say our goodbyes? Does anybody find this stuff useful? Is this stuff that you think you'll use daily?